Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the Buddy Ruski Show. This is episode 15. 15 is a serendipitous number for us this week. We hit 15 Patreon subscribers on Saturday. We published Soundtrack Volume 15, featuring a slew of songs produced by prolific indie pop, hip hop, indie rock producer Danger Mouse, one of my favorites. And we have episode 15 of the Buddy Ruski Show, so quite a lot to wrap our minds around this week. Really excited to be back at the podcast desk. This is actually an older recording of my conversation with Nicole. We met in between the times that I was in Vermont teaching with Putney Student Travel. As many of you know who follow me on social or read the newsletter have seen that I've been in and out of my home this year for a number of reasons, teaching, going out to Utah to see the national parks out there with Holland and Carter. So it's been a little tough to have some consistency at the podcast desk, but I'm excited to finally have a chance to interview so many guests that I've had on my radar for some time now. But this conversation with Nicole is great. It definitely aged well. We're still amidst the coronavirus, so all the COVID talk, unfortunately, has also aged appropriately. But again, really excited to share this conversation with you. Nicole is the founder of Empowered Dance Studio in downtown Durham, but outside of that is just an incredible person, offers a lot to the community. Durham, born and raised. You'll hear a pretty funny tidbit about how our paths aligned in Durham without us even knowing it. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation. If you haven't already, check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/Buddy Ruski. Going to be putting a lot more up there in the coming weeks, maybe some patron exclusive content. So yeah, definitely check out the Patreon page, and let's get into our conversation with Nicole. Nicole Oxendine, thanks for being on the Buddy Ruski Show today.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and chat with you, seeing you from the distance, but just now get a chance to interact and talk about what is happening in my life. And yeah.
I imagine it's quite a bit as a, as we're all dealing with COVID, as a small business owner, as a person of color during the time of protests and big conversation around racial injustice. I'm sure there's a lot on your mind. So I appreciate you taking the time to try and step out of that a little bit and talk about maybe some fun stuff for an hour or so before we have to return to this crazy world that we live in.
Yeah.
So you, like many of my guests, are from Durham. Grew up here. It sounds like you school all the way through, elementary to high school here. I have my own perceptions of what Durham was like, because I also grew up here in Durham, sort of before the big renaissance at the start of the last decade. But what was Durham like for you growing up, and how did that sort of shape the direction that your life took, sort of going into your professional career?
Yeah, and I like that you asked that. During this time, I've really been reflecting about my growing up in Durham. I grew up in country Durham in the county, off a dirt road before RTP was built. So RTP, I remember it being built in my backyard, literally. So going up on that side of town, I felt like I had a very interesting and diverse experience of Durham. based on the neighbors playing hard. I mean, I love watching Stranger Things. I'm like, gosh, you like watch it and you may like, where are the parents? This is me, us riding on the four-wheeler trails and walking around in the, like exploring in the backyard with the crew of kids. Like that was really for me how I grew up. And then grew up in a very religious family. So we always in an international church. So my pastor was Ghanaian and his wife was Mexican, and we would always have in our home people from different backgrounds, from different cultures that just moved into
Did
the
you go to
city.
Life International?
I sure did.
My grandparents have been going to that church for like 30 years.
Wait a second. Who are your grandparents?
Leon and Dolores Stevens.
Shut up.
Yeah.
Yes, I know them. Like,
yeah, of course, of course.
Oh my gosh. This
really
is so
cool.
Durham. Like,
yeah.
It's like there's no way that there's not been some crazy intersection of our lives if you're from Durham.
That's really cool.
That is so crazy. Well, yeah. So then the church. That is the church that I've been going to since, how old am I? 30-something years. So
yeah, cool.
Yeah. So I mean, it gave me a good context for me, and my family would always have Sunday dinner. Every Sunday we would, open our doors and just feed people. It was like right after church, just come and eat. And I look at that now and, looking at how I was as a child, and just always knowing my parents opened up the door and we were very community centric, going to a church that was just always welcoming and opening our space to people, gave me a very diverse experience. That I don't think I appreciated until I left Durham to go live in another city. I was like, oh my gosh, I grew up in a very enmeshed, very mixed cultural background. And, even though I was in the country,
right.
with my, some of my white friends who, parents didn't like Black people, but, we all play, so it wasn't that feel, that you don't really know or get as a child, and you just experience it. So I don't know if I answered that fully, just to kind of talk a little bit about that. My country, I would say, cultural country background.
Yeah, and I think that many of the people that I've talked to that are from Durham have had similar experiences as kids, growing up and feeling like they had a real community around them, regardless of what neighborhood they grew up in, that there's this thread around, for generations, around building community in Durham, and how important that is to people, and how it impacts children that grow up here, and the way that they view the world, and the values that they have as they become young adults and go off to college, become business owners, and try to instill those same values. So I think that that's something that's been a part of Durham's ethos for a long time. That's not a new Durham philosophy. That has been part of Durham for a long time. So did you feel like that same experience that you had with church and in your neighborhood, did that translate to the schools you were going to as well? Was there that same sense of community and diversity in the school system?
Yeah, so interesting enough, my age, probably, I'm going to give my age a little bit, was city and county. I remember when the city and county became one, and that was the shift in the school system. And to say this, I was a teacher for 13 years. So and I was the first class through the new hillside. So, and that new hillside was the redistricting. If you remember that time, and it was, I was supposed to go to Jordan based on the district. So that was a huge shift for me. It was a cultural shift. Hillside was was a predominantly Black school. However, they were trying to push this integration, which is crazy that in the 90s, and we're, the whole concept of we're going to integrate this school now, and it's not going to be all Black. It stayed, I have a few white classmates that went with the Hillside with me. But it was a cultural shift because my friends were now no longer, people who I was in school with were no longer the diverse group that I had, played with, so school now was just a very different experience. And I love my time at Hillside. It showed me the span of Black people. And that was a thing that, not everybody's Black. So, in these other schools, it's like, all right, well, the football players are the Black guys, or, the jocks and the cheerleaders and the theater geeks. It's just like you have the theater geeks are also Black, the nerds. So it wasn't this, how you section off, and a lot of times it becomes about race, and you identify with yourself racially, it was, I see people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. I mean, my closest friend is former Mayor Bell, Christian Bell, like, so, your people's, who were descendants of the Black Wall Street that you're going to school with in these families. So you have this incredible legacy. And you also have classmates that are living in they're living in McDougal Terrace too. So the experience of Hillside, going from like a diverse growing up, being younger, but going to Hillside into this Black community was amazing. It really did shape a lot for me, because I was able to see Blacks as not just fitting in one category.
Yeah. Were there other schools that you had an opportunity to go to? And did your parents sort of push you towards Hillside for that reason, do you think?
Well, I'm the oldest of 5. I should probably have premised
Okay.
that. And we're all pretty close in age. And all of my siblings went to a different school. So for
Wow.
high school. So we went to the same elementary and middle school, but the magnet schools were a big deal then. So my parents didn't, it was take the bus to wherever's closest. So by the time I was driving, I was taking all of my siblings. I have one that went to Jordan, Riverside, DSA, like I was the transport
Yeah.
to picking and dropping off my siblings from school. So they did, I didn't as the oldest, but my siblings all had opportunities to, so I got a chance to kind of have their experience. And we talk about those things of how they experienced school.
What was the, when you think back on how the Black experience was talked about or brought up in the educational system, do you feel like, looking back, that it was sort of adequate to or adequate enough for equipping both Black students in terms of knowing their own history, but also other people, and how to have those conversations around some of the things that we're dealing with right now?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was because I taught, at Hillside for so long. I think my perspective is going to be very different on this. When I was a student, I was maybe more connected to it because of my classmates, and I would see their parents' names on the wall, like you would see, oh, see a last name of someone, you would see them and you would know. And the history of Hillside as well, where you had some of these, and I think old school teachers, like some of these that have been around for years that are teaching, and it's like going to an HBCU, and you get that knowledge because it's just passed down because your teacher is still in the community and connected to the community, and maybe went to Hillside like I did, and so kind of that same cycle. So that legacy that you do have, what I have seen as a teacher now, is that there's not that connection. So those teachers have passed on. And if you don't have a teacher that's still connected to the community, they're not sharing those. Even if you're teaching chemistry, they're still talking about, like you get the Black history and, how that connects, you get that, but you don't have that right now in the school system, that these students are not getting it. And even when I bring some of my classmates, they're doing amazing things. Anytime I have come speak to the kids, come talk to them so they can see that you can have role models that are not so far gone, but someone that came through this school, that came out and did those things, that's something that you might want to do. So I think, I wish that Durham Black history was taught in the school. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I wish that was the case now. I think these kids don't know about Black Wall Street. I just learned later in life. And that's that piece that we should be learning about our heritage. And if you don't have a direct connection to it, then, that's where our history gets lost. And that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I certainly didn't know growing up that schools like T. Spalding and Shepherd Middle School were named after these really important figures in Durham's history. And I would even say, like, outside of just Black Wall Street, I would say Durham history across the board, it just was not, like, I didn't learn about the Dukes either. I just think that Durham history was kind of lost in the shuffle of all the other things we were trying to that they were trying to teach us. But you're right that it's important to have role models that are rooted in your community and places that you can touch. When you go to a school like Shepherd, as a young Black person and learn the history about why, you know, a prominent Black businessman and scholar, you know, was so influential that they had this school named after them. That does a lot to your psyche in terms of how you see yourself and your peers and your potential. Um, Versus, you know, we learn about folks like Martin Luther King and George Washington
Yeah.
Carver and Rosa Parks, who are obviously very important, um, you know, figures in the movement, but they're not quite as tangible. You know, we're, to your point, like we don't have neighbors or peers whose parents were part of Black Wall Street. Um, and so making those connections is really valuable to shaping how young people see themselves, and particularly people of color. So you know, it's nice just to hear that at least maybe in some of the schools there was a little bit of that being discussed because of the communities that existed within the school walls.
I'll go back and say historically, it's not happening right
Yeah.
now. Not to the extent. So, and
Did you?
it makes me come like, mhm.
No, go ahead.
No, it just was thinking it does bring me to why empower is important to me. Like that's a rooted to that piece of that exposure and feeling limited in the school system by how can we educate and what's that next level and how can we impart in this, you know, in the next generation so that they know their history and they can be empowered by that. They can see tangible um, people that they can touch and that, you know, okay, this person, I mean, our building, my building was owned by two Black women when we moved downtown, and I just brought them into the class, you know, the two owners, Elaine and Dawn. And I was like, look, you know, like there's these two Black women, they own the building that Empower is going to be in, you know, like just that thing of like, you don't have to be a dancer per se, but look at this, you can own a building, you know, like just that, like you said, that psyche of just how do you, it's so important at a young age to do that and to begin to see and understand those images. So I'm extremely passionate about children getting that, having those seeds planted.
Were you a dancer growing up? Did you do a lot of dance as a young person?
I danced in church,
Okay.
and I say that lightly. I actually, you know, I definitely believe that was a huge blessing for me because the teacher that I had, she was happened to be from France, well trained. Like, so we're definitely, I'm playing in her garage on the ballet bar, the gospel music and Christian songs, you know, like, so I did get a great dance education. And it just really linked on at Hillside. So I danced at Hillside in high school. I started late at 11 officially, but 8 I was dancing like all the time. Like it was just, and anytime I talk to kids and they're like, you know, I'm like, are you a dancer? Have you been dancing? And they're like, well, they haven't been in school. And I'm like, well, you dance at home, right? Like, like yeah. And I'm like, well, that's where I started dancing, like in the living room, you know, and given kind of that validity of dance. So yeah, I started pretty young, went through once I was hooked into dance, and after high school I knew I wanted to pursue it to some degree. We can get into that later, but that wasn't a career. So dance is just a hobby or a talent, something you do on the side. So I was never, didn't put the mindset on. So my degree is psychology and dance for college, but I wanted to go to school for dance, but I was not, you know, that was not the thing to do. When I was growing up, that was like, yeah, you gotta dance on the side and be a lawyer or something like
But do those
for
two
your
things
real
even
job.
go together? I mean, I think that I feel like if you were a lawyer and said that you dance on the side, it's almost like those are two conflicting states of mind and like two conflicting communities that don't really mesh together. So that, but that also goes to what you talked about in terms of the communities that you had at Hillside, where we have all these different reflections of personalities within the Black community. And I think that that's something that even to this day, many folks, really, you know, of all races, sort of deal with this internal struggle between what is acceptable within their culture and what they, you know, feel in their core and want to pursue. And so that clashing of culture internally can make it really difficult for people to find their footing. And it sounds like maybe you went through some of that as you're leaving high school. wanting to pursue dance, but also being told and sort of absorbing that there's no future in dance. And so I have to think of, a different plan A, and dance will be my side hustle or my plan B.
And I think in our Black community, it's doctor, lawyer, teacher, like those are like one of the few of those. That's your checklist where you're going to be. And, I was like, I guess a lawyer then. And I said, I never wanted to be a teacher, and I never wanted to have a dance studio. Like, I was like, I never want to be a teacher, and I never want to have a dance studio. So I'm going to keep saying my nevers so that, never want to be a billionaire, whatever. But I say that, I do, and this, I keep going back. So when I did begin to teach, that was one of those things of like, how can I expand that concept? So you don't have to be, because I felt very torn. I mean, I quit dancing for a year in college. Like I was very, I did all the right things. I was like SGA VP. I ran Senate. I was a congressional intern.
Where did you go to school?
For Collins University, an all-women's college in Roanoke, Virginia. And that was also an amazing experience for me, finding my voice at an all-women's college. It just really helped me to not, because I'm very shy. Where the buzzword is introverted, but it's like I was a creative. I've always been a creative. So it's that piece of like, how do you express yourself? For me, dance was my expression, but I had all these thoughts and all these things, but how do I speak in a room sometimes, or not being threatened by the male voice or the mansplaining? Like I didn't experience, so it really did build my voice to go to an all women's college, and ties back around to why Empower is so important to me.
So you said you skipped dancing, or sort of put a pause on dancing for a year. Did the university have a dance program, or did you have to pick up dancing again outside of the school?
So ironically, it was one of the best programs, and I'll explain. The dean of the American Dance Festival was my professor. So what she would do, anybody that came to American Dance Festival would be vetted and taught. They would come and teach us first. So if I name who I've been trained by in the dance world, it's pretty it's pretty significant. Even people who are just getting their starts, that she's launched their careers. She now runs University of the Arts in Philadelphia, but she was very innovative and creative around dance and how to think about dance. I also started in that department as arts administration, but I was also the only Black girl in a small program. So that was also a lot of anxiety around that, even cultural anxiety for me of like, all right, I didn't naturally have rhythm. I'm more of a ballet dancer. So if we had somebody come in that was teaching a certain style, I would feel very intimidated. Weight, size, all of those things in my body, and just feeling like, you're already hyper analyzing yourself as a dancer. So you add being a dancer of color and the only one in the room, it becomes really hard. Another person I remember latching on to she's now a professor at Duke, Andrea Woods Valdez. She's like my mentor now. But any Black teacher that came in, I was like, teach me, like, and I would just latch on to these. And it was like, I say this, it was like maybe two people, like, and the one dancer that was before me, a class before me, I really just latched on to. But just knowing that I needed and was craving that I need someone to nurture me and to develop and grow me as a dancer, because I don't feel like I was getting that growth, or I was being ignored. I wouldn't be cast in pieces because I didn't have the look. So all of those things, and I'm sure any dancer of color can tell you, this is the experience that you go through in this space. So that was one of the reasons why I quit dancing for that year, was I didn't feel like there was a place for me and my type of expression in the world of dance. And you didn't see that in the world you're looking at. And once again, we're back and forth at American Dance Festival. Like it's not, it's a small school, but we weren't isolated in that sense of where my classmates have been launched into careers, that are still performing with companies to this day. But knowing for me that wasn't my journey, but not understanding that then my journey was to be that dancer. I mean, sitting on the side, not getting chosen, but having that piece is once again what pushed me and propelled me. Okay, I want to make sure that dancers are trained are equipped, if they want to go into this world, have a sense of, okay, what is it that you need to know? What are the cultural things that you need to know to be able to like get into a company if that's what you want to do? Like I just, and I didn't have any of that context in school.
Were there some expectations when it sounds like a lot of your traditional training in dance before college was in ballet? Do you feel like there was an expectation of you as a Black woman to be able to perform certain types of dance, or sort of being typecasted as a certain type of dancer? Um, and again, sort of those conflicting stereotypes or like cultural aspects where there's your expectation over here and sort of what you have trained yourself in over here, and they're not meeting in the middle.
Yeah, the program I was in was very selective, and I could see it after I was in. I didn't understand it per se, because I didn't understand, like I said, the cultural piece of it. So as a Black dancer coming in, I should have been at a certain level in all skill. Like you had, like it's the same thing. You got to be, twice as good to have as much, and I wasn't. I didn't have enough training. I wasn't at. Some of these kids were coming from School of the Arts, like who had, years of training in ballet and modern, and I'm in a modern program where they're trying to get you to learn a little bit of everything. Not everything, but your instructors were coming in from, like I say, all different genres of dance. And if you have strong foundational technique, you can adapt to it a little bit better. But if you didn't have that like hours of training, or I didn't come from a traditional studio background, that was a huge barrier for me to even, and to be in the space where for me, I was just naturally talented. And I needed that kind of additional, like some of the terminology I didn't even know. So that was a whole thing of like, oh, my ballet teacher is not demonstrating. They're going to talk to you in French. They're going to give you the full, and you have to be able, and they're not going to like, you don't get like a long time to go over and walk it through. They're going to be like, all right, go. And it's like, I could get it if you just give me like a little bit of time, like that piece. So I just didn't have that, I didn't have that culture. I didn't understand the culture of the dance world because I wasn't raised in the culture of the dance world. I was taught, but not ingrained in it. So people who came into that space had a huge advantage. And then you add me being a person of color and not having that back, I could have come in as a white girl, and I know my experience would have been very different. They would have taken me in and said, okay, I see what you have, let's do this. But no, she's not even halfway there what we expect her to be. So yeah.
So you said that you didn't have any plans to be a teacher, and you didn't want to open a dance studio, but you've done both of those things since leaving college. So how you graduated as a psych major. How did what was the entry point into teaching? And because it seems like in some ways that was always your destiny, having experienced some of the things that you talked about in school, feeling like you weren't empowered to be the person that you wanted to be, or to at least be cultivated into the person that you wanted to be. And so that there was this experience that you had that I think is what ends up leading a lot of people to teaching, is wanting to make sure that the generations that come after them aren't don't experience the same things that you do. So how do you, after saying to yourself you're not going to teach, you're not going to open a studio, what nudges you back down that path?
Yeah, this is where I go into, I've always been a creative. So when I graduated, and I say creative because my parents just thought I'm crazy for doing certain things. I'm just like, I just felt like doing this. So I like hopped in the car and went on this like week-long trip traveling across the East Coast. Like, I'm just gonna go find myself, and just spent time kind of like what I'm doing now, of like aligning and figuring out what I'm supposed to do in my life. And it was just very clearly dropped in my spirit, this dance. I didn't know what that was gonna be. Had no intentions of graduating and pursuing dance at this point. But it was very clear, and it was just dance. So I went back, I guess, to visit. I can't remember how this happened, but my former dance teacher was like, "Well, I'm leaving teaching at Hillside. Do you want to come and teach?" And I was like, "Well, fine. I don't have anything else to do. It dance is supposed to be happening, so I'll just do this for a year, and then I'll apply to law school or something." Like it was definitely only supposed to be a year, and I mean, I just I fell in love. Like it was that, and it was the joy of teaching and the joy of connecting and touching. And it was a hard year. I mean, I had girls that were in gangs, rival gangs, fighting each other at lunch, and they would both be sent to like my class. They had dance after, but no one would caught who did it. So, and I laugh on that because it was like, oh my God, Woody. So I would like turn the lights down, do some like low music, and then I was like, are we just gonna meditate? Like not knowing. This is just things I learned at how like that. There's some of the things I did in undergrad. I was like, we're just gonna breathe, and I mean really having a different approach. And then the music that I would choose for their pieces, I made sure they had a little, just introducing them to a different culture of music that they weren't hearing or listening to. It was like, all right, we're going to try this African rap song, okay, like to dance to. Another piece I would give them, I would be intentional around the lyrics that I would give, just because I could see that they were just hurting. It wasn't that the aggression and all that. It was just that I had a room of hurt girls, and knowing that this was a space. So I was very intentional around making this a safe space. So choosing lyrics of music that empowered and encouraged them and let them see themselves, like, just putting them in little dresses and leotards. I mean, that was letting them be girls, and let, like, just like in a dance, in a show, or, we had a costume closet full of clothes and loved doing the costumes, and just seeing that joy come to them was, like one of the most rewarding moments of my life. And I'm like, okay, I'm in the right thing. And it just clearly 13 years later, and I should say 4 years later, there was a break in that time where I started having students share a lot of heavy things with me. And I was at the point, I was like, I'm not a counselor. So I'm not, and I would send them to the counselor, and it was college applications. Like, are you serious? This girl just shared with me a sexual assault that happened to her, and I'm directing her to a counselor, and this is what you do. Like, so I began once again, I won't say once again, but I became frustrated and angry with the system, but also was like, there's something that's happening in my classroom that is allowing this conversation to happen. I mean, it was to the point I'd have food, pads, tampons, anything that they needed in that space. So that became a safe space. So I knew I wanted to go to grad school, and was digging through programs and found dance therapy, which was psychology and dance. And that was exactly what my undergrad was. Yeah.
What were who were some of the artists that you were playing for them early on in your teaching career?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Like, I love this question. And I also probably will do this a poll out on social media for my old students to like share back their memories. Mariah Carey Butterfly was one of the songs that I would use. Erica Badu, India Ari. Oh, she had really good, India Ari, like just great. And it was, for me, it was that neo soul time and that era when it was like these artists were fresh coming out. So not too much that was super old. Zap Mama, I really got into. And then I'm like, so it's like crazy to feel like you're old. I remember going to the records, like there was a store downtown across from Morgan Imports. It was like a record store.
Millennium Music?
Yes. And
Yeah.
I would go there, and that's how I would find music. Sometimes I would go to the different genres and sections, and would just listen and pick up the different, just different, to find different international music. So to me, it was finding them something that was safe in a comfort zone. Okay, I know Mariah Carey, but then let's introduce you to Zap Mama. Let's try Flowetry. Like, what are these different things, and then being intentional about the songs. We never used songs that were on the radio. So if you did have a CD, trying to say, all right, let me dig into this artist and see what they're talking about. And it was really more just messaging. So it could be any artist, but do they have an empowering message? Or, JoJo, like, is there a song with an empowering message on their album? And that was always the fun part of digging into the older artists, or going to the millennium music and finding new artists, or things that I just needed to expose myself to.
Yeah, I felt really fortunate. My dad worked in music, and my mom was also a huge fan of different things growing up. And so music for me was a place that I feel like my world really was expanded. Even though I didn't necessarily travel a lot, my dad listened to a lot of world music. My mom was really into those same uh like late 90s, early 2000s neo soul R&B artists. Lauryn Hill, Alicia Keys, Jill Scott, Queen Latifah, like the full gambit. And so I think that that really helped me, yeah, just opened me up to different perspectives and different, like you said, different messaging that is really important
Mhm.
for any young person to hear. And
Nas, love Nas messaging.
yeah, and I think, it's
Yeah.
something that I worry about a little bit in this time that we're in, that there's not nearly the groundswell of popular artists that have the same kind of messaging, and I wonder what that does to. And I feel bad whenever I talk about like music from my time being better, but I do think that there is something to be
I
said about the messaging and just like the um sort of like pro black, pro empowerment uh
mhm.
environment that a lot of those artists cultivated that is a little harder to find. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's a little harder to find. You've got your Kendrick Lamar's, you've got a couple songs from artists in there, you've got Rhapsody, but uh, they're the exception to the rule now instead of the norm. And so I'm glad to hear that that was something that you leveraged, was exposing them to music that sort of roping them in with the artists they know, and then exposing them to things that they surely would like if they had just, if they're just exposed to it.
And that's a key thing, and I still do this with my shows to this day. Is I love exploring music and also blending music, blending genres of music, and even to hear there's a piece of Basement Jacks, like love Basement Jacks, but would use some of their music and then infuse it with something, then like do these great blends. But I feel like even parents are like, what's the sound? I need the soundtrack to your show. Like the music is so good, but and then it comes to that point now the students would bring music too. Well, I just heard this and I feel, like, so that exchange of things and kind of what you were saying of having that, how music can bring about community and how it can, can really um, foster conversations, but also challenging the next generation to be like, all right, well, and they had projects too. I had the same criteria that I gave myself, I would give them. So it would challenge them to kind of go and dig into music so much that they'd be bringing me things. And that, even to this day, I have students that'll text me, have you heard this song? Like, and I'm like, sounds like something you would like. And I'm like, yes, love it. Thank you. Yeah,
It's
but full
important to have
circle.
those young voices sending you music, because that's a place where I feel more and more out of touch, is
It's
what's
not the mainstream
right.
anymore.
Right. So you were teaching at Hillside. It sounds like, sort of because of the complications of being in the public school system, maybe, and the things that you were dealing with, that you started to see a need for an alternative outside of teaching at Hillside. Um, is that where the vision for the dance studio, Empower Dance Studio, that you have now, is that where that began?
Yeah, in a way. So after I finished grad school, and that was the dance movement therapy and counseling program. I went back to teach it. I taught in the elementary at Club Boulevard for a little bit, and then I went back to Hillside. They actually asked me to come back to Hillside to teach. And this was after leaving for 3 years and living in Chicago. So I did. So I knew that I was doing the right things before, but I had a different intention of like, okay, now I understand what I'm doing. Now I have the merging the psychology behind like, okay, there's these stages of development, and this is why these things are happening. And then what am I doing within my curriculum that's going to help build this sense and help one like the meditation. All right, now let's bring it to a circle, and we may do some of the same things, but now let's talk about some things. So we're now talking about real issues, talking about police violence, and like just thinking about these things. People who, the children whose, I say children, teens whose family members, brothers were murdered. So you have that. We're able now to have before I wasn't having those conversations after grad school, it opened me up to be able to help facilitate the like, okay, we're gonna move, but today let me attune you. Let's sit, let's talk. Like, it doesn't have to be, that takes you back to those old school teachers of like, all right, it's not just about boom, boom, boom. What else is the lesson today? Let's just sit around and let's talk about what's happening in the world, and giving them license to share, how it affects them, talking about like personal space and how to claim your own space, which is huge. And when we talk about abuse and setting boundaries and personal boundaries. So I entered with a different lens that really helped me see that developmentally, where the kids were at the high school level, what needed to happen, there was a huge gap. So when I first came back, I was in the elementary school, and you see these like kids with all, I start when I say the kindergartners with all of this, I want to say agency and power behind them. And you get to the high school and you see, these girls layering themselves with makeup. And I'm like, wait, is it y'all still like pressing your hair out? Y'all not, we were doing Erica Badu when I first started teaching. It was like, Nash, I thought this was what it was going to be. And it wasn't. And these girls didn't want to have their natural hair. They felt very, I don't want to say, it wasn't self-conscious, but it was just this thing of like not being okay in their own bodies and not seeing their beauty and their power. So it bothered me. And at the same time, I had these little girls who were about 8. They were like, I can't wait to come to Hillside and dance with you, Miss Ox, and I'm like, girl, you 8 years old. This is high school, but it was a lot at the time. And I'm like, I see there's a connection here. And anytime there's a shift in my life, it's always a child that pushes it. So it was that begin to think of the connections of, okay, what if I were able to give what I'm doing at Hillside to younger kids? How can we start young at building that sense of self? We tell these girls, hey, you're beautiful, but put this makeup on and put this weave in your head. And you're telling this to young girls, and put this little short top on and this, oh girl, you pretty, like it's after you dolled them up and you didn't acknowledge their beauty in its most basic form. And how can we begin to send those messages at an earlier age? And I've been honing in and understanding that more, but that's really where the seeds of Empower started. It was also, once I said, born out of that frustration of the school system of, okay, I felt like it was like pushing me out, if that makes sense. It was like, all right, the push into what's the next thing. I would have not jumped out here without having those. And I am faith-based. Empower is faith-based because I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, and I believe that a power greater than ourselves. And I look at that and I make those connections with these kids, and I believe that they're most connected to it. And how can we just grow them and empower them? And I can get into the technicalities of how Empower started, but the vision was literally just looking at me like, when you gonna open up a studio for me? Yeah.
Was it important for you to bring these ideas back to Durham? Were there other places, having spent some time in Chicago? Chicago has its own, sort of very troubled history and present with turmoil in the Black community, whether it be police violence or intercommunity disruptions. So were there other places that you were looking at, sort of taking your gifts and your lessons, or was there a calling back to Durham that you couldn't ignore?
Yeah, I think it's ironic as we're in COVID right now. When I was in Chicago, I was intentional around where my internships were. I worked in a psychiatric unit, primarily Black and brown children. I worked in the South Side in a high school, North Lawndale, not North, I'm going to get that. High school and South Side. Then I also worked high school and East Side, which is worse. Like South Side is not, South Side is like Durham to me. It's not, people say it's bad, but East Side is a whole other, I say third world country. Like that was literally how it felt. Not how it felt, how it looked, just everything there. So I was always intentional about the who I wanted to impact and what communities that I wanted to be connected to. I say bring this back to COVID because I intended to be in Durham, but I see it's bigger than that. I know it's bigger than that. I know that the reach of what this is supposed to be is not just Durham. Um, I logically speaking, I have a strong like I have more connections in Durham. It's easier access point to do the things that I want to do based on my history and community and the sense and the work that I've done at Hillside. So it was very, and I also taught at North Carolina Central. So it's a piece of like this is where the foundation. This is always the HQ to me. And as I'm thinking of the pivot and the next transition, it is all right. How can this be bigger to affect those children that would not, that wouldn't be connected. I've even gone back to Chicago and done workshops, so I don't see it as something that is Durham specifics per se, just because I think the issue is larger. And I don't know how many people are thinking of dance as this tool of empowering and confidence and building confidence in the next generation, and what that will look like for the next bosses of the world. How you can enter a room and you can have so much more confidence because this was able to stay with you. That level of building that empowerment didn't just go out the window, but you started that with those planting those seeds at a young age of like, all right, I can do this. I can do anything. Like I can approach this. I have the confidence to enter rooms that people who don't look like me and not feel like I'm an imposter.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the technicality for how Empower came to be and where you think it stands out in terms of the work that you're doing to cultivate that sense of self-confidence um, and and pride in the students that come through your studio.
Yeah. So just the few things I always say was three catalyst points that pushed me into, all right, it's time, even though it had been weighing on my spirit for a while. One of my first people who ever introduced me to dance when I was 8 came back into my life randomly and was like, hey, come see Alvin Ailey with me. It was a snowstorm or something. I was like, yes, I will go see Alvin Ailey with you. So I went with her, and she was the spiritual mother to the artistic director, the other dancer, Hope Boykin, who's from Durham, and a few other dancers. Like, so she wasn't just going, like she was going there as, oh, she's a mentor person. I'm like, okay, this woman comes back into my life. I haven't seen her since I was like, 8, so I was really young. So her coming back into my life and really just reinforcing the need and really having that conversation and spending time with me and saying, this is something that is needed. This is something like what your vision is. Talk to me about what that could be. Began to formulate with her. My other one was I um, I'm hopping to the third one, so I'm gonna hop to the like that was the first one. Second one was just the school system was the kind of that pushing out. I was doing so much for so many other people. So I was performing in a company at the time. The Hillside program is very rigorous. If anybody knows Durham, like not only was I teaching, we had after school program. You've heard Mr. Tabbs plays, who was doing all the choreography. Like you're looking at weeks, months, most of the year. And when you're good at it, you get more.
Right.
Get more work. So that was taking a lot of time. And I was also working at American Dance Festival. Starting that early in May. So my level of work and what I was doing at the time was very high. But it was also, and I was leading the district for Durham for the dance teachers. So I was the lead teacher, doing a lot of programs. So a lot of my time was being put out, but it wasn't being appreciated. And that was that piece of like, okay, I'm working so hard for other people in the same way that I want to empower others. How can I empower myself? Because at that point I wasn't feeling empowered. I was feeling very defeated, and I was just feeling exhausted, and I was feeling frustrated and angry and upset. And still feeling like I want to make a bigger difference. I want to do more. And I see these kids and they need so much, but I can't, like I'm, there's not so much I have to give. So at this point, I'm like, I know a studio needs to happen because I need to have a long-term plan so that I can financially be better, because I can't, staying at the school system is not effective, because it's also not being recognized. The work that I'm doing, even, and I say this, Hillside on a national level, like we were traveling, getting accepted to perform for the International Dance festival. We placed first in the state for dance competition. These kids had not had only 4 years, maybe 3 years of experience or training with me, and getting to that level, but still not being, recognized or appreciated within the school system, and not even getting tenure. So that was a whole other like piece. So once I knew the student needed to start, I said, I just need a studio director. At this point, I have to keep my job teaching, but I need someone to help run the studio. One of my former students, which a lot of my alum will come back and they'll work with me and help me do things. And it's pretty much training for them. And she was like, well, all I want to do is be a studio director. And I was like, okay. This is happening. And that was Jessica Burrows. And from then on, it just went so quickly that it just feels like such a whirlwind. This is 5 years this month of the business. And we started with 25 students. We're at 125 now. Low revenue, I should say. No, we were at Hayti Heritage Center. Most of the teachers might have been either current high school students or former students that I brought on to teach. But it's just, it's exponentially grown, and a lot of that work was grounded in that sense of community that we always, and it's a family atmosphere. We're family oriented, and I think, I love it when dads call the studio and they're like, I'm looking for something for my daughter to do. She dancing around, and I know they've done their research, and they're looking specifically because of, one, I'm very intentional about what the girls wear, that they're covered, that the leotards fit, that there's a thick strap, you need to wear a bra underneath it, that it's something that covers your butt, and that the tights match your skin color. Like, we take that time to match that, and and that piece of having everyone wear the same thing is also an equal, and is equity. A lot of times you see other studios where, okay, well, you can afford to buy the fancier leotard when everybody gets the same basic leotard that comes with your package. And then where we can be appreciating our differences, our skin and our hair texture, and that, I'm not forcing the slick back bun. You can have all kinds of different styles you can do with your hair that are still acceptable, which you just don't get at traditional studios. And we're not having girls in here with, 8-year-olds with little midriffs on and short shorts and heavy makeup. Like, that's not what you're going to see here. So like I said, I love when the dads call, because I already know that that's what they looked at. They've noticed that in the marketing. More so than the moms. It's kind of funny though. Like, we chose this studio. Yeah.
I wonder how, so, social media, and specifically things like TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. I don't really understand it fully. I just know that it's a very dance friendly platform. And I'm wondering, are they on it? Yeah. It seems inevitable for anyone under the age of like 15. But I wonder how that impacts the way that young people see themselves, and how that may affect the way that you're teaching, what you're teaching and how you're teaching, where so many kids sort of their value comes from their presence on social media, and specifically with how they present themselves physically, whether that be all the things you mentioned before, like the way they wear their hair, the makeup they put on, but even now with something like TikTok, like the dance videos that they do, a lot of kids are doing, they're dancing very early on, maybe not in a traditional sense, but they're on camera doing all these crazy dances. But I'm curious if it affects sort of like what that kind of performance is for, and if they understand the difference between sort of like traditional performance in a dance studio versus doing things on camera for TikTok, and the value in one or the other. It just seems like social media plays such a big part in teaching in general, but I'm wondering how specifically it affects you with dancers.
Yeah, one thing that I know Empower is unique, and I've heard this from several other studios, is we do a lot of performances. I don't know how often, like they're almost in a lot of cases, we're not as competition focused, that we're more community performance based. And one thing I love seeing them, and it's even teaching them of like, okay, when someone, after you perform, you say, you're well, thank you, or someone compliments you, you say, thank you. What it's just to teach them kind of that performance etiquette, but giving them that exposure in front of an audience that's not just the recital, the big kind of piece, but that I think, and I say this because I think it helps distinguish or make the difference of understanding, okay, this is you giving something to someone. You're performing for an audience at a community event. You're part of, that is something that people are receiving, and it's not just I'm coming to see my child on stage. It is being a part of a greater community. I think there is definitely challenges with social media in the same vein, because it's doing certain things for likes, and then what is the appearance or the thing that pushes, that gets you there. And that's kind of going back to the high school. You see most of the, and I say this, the contour and the faces, like people begin to do the same things because that's what's on trend and that look. So now we have like TikTok, which is on trend. And I think, how can we use, in my brain, I'm like, how can we use that platform? And I would use, taking this back before, like YouTube videos. That's how I would get the best performances out of my students. And I would be like, I'm making this a YouTube video, so I'm going to record this and I'm going to put this on our YouTube channel and you can have it to share. That would get the performance. And then if I'm in the studio now, I'm recording you all. This is for social media. Okay, they get it all the way together. And I'm like, you were looking real bad before I said this. We're going to put you on social. But how do you use that in the way that's like, okay, let's elevate and have them elevate? So I don't have the answer to the TikTok question because I haven't
I don't
hopped
think
into
anyone
it, but
does.
but I think it's that, how do you build that community, or how can you build a community, understand that who is on the other side of that? And I think that's that performance piece of, you get to see the reaction of it. It's that interaction of being able to see how someone responds to you, as you are dancing and moving, and or your performance piece. And I think if we can figure out how to make that happen, it would kind of shift that, or just
Yeah, and there's some ownership of that, those performances and that culture, that I think is important too, because I've read too many articles at this point about, even before TikTok, on things like Instagram and Vine, where black creatives are coming up with things and then they get adopted and are not credited for sort of being the source of the fad or trend or whatever it is. This happened, I don't remember what dance it is now. I think it was happening around the NBA All-Star game, where there were people doing this particular TikTok dance thing, and folks on Twitter were getting really upset because the young black woman who had started it, like, wasn't the person at NBA All-Star weekend performing the dance. And it was like, this doesn't seem right. And it just seems like that story is happens too often. And so I feel like there's a opportunity, specifically with social media, to like teach some um ownership. Like, this isn't just you performing for likes and shares, but like, you can
yeah.
leverage your cultural influence into other avenues, that then one day you can like have the power to buy your own building, to bring it full circle. So yeah, I'm curious sort of how you see, in this day and time, leveraging uh, the lessons that you're teaching to propel students that may not be considering dance, but what are they getting out of dance that uh, will last their lifetime?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting you talk about the like I'm gonna say licensing, but we talk about this in choreography. Like, you create something and it can be taken if it's put out there. And we've had these conversations years ago when videos, it first started becoming popular, and what does that look like now? And I think of like going back to like ownership, and that's something that's so important to me. Okay, yes, I was gonna be not gonna say gonna be a lawyer, but so was steered away from the opportunity of dance could be a career and it's something that you could make money off of. Um, as opposed to, okay, now that you've gotten to this space, what were the steps? What were the lessons? Like, okay, yes, I'm a dancer, but I'm also a business owner, an entrepreneur. That I didn't go to school for that, like I learned this through trial and error. And what I want to give is like, what if I would have known this? What if I would have had this information before? Where would that have propelled me or put me? And that's the same premise of me, why Empower exists. And that's the next phase for me is, all right, what if I give this information to a young child? Okay, not just the dancer. What if we talked about business and we talked about, and I'm talking to one of my young dancers now, which I need to call her Mia's Cupcakes, Mia's Munchies, who's starting a business. And we've been having phone calls and we talk business, and I'm like, you send me an email, we're going to schedule a business meeting and we're going to talk about, let's talk about your numbers. Tell me what your pitch is. Like, I see that as being a way to, okay, I have these, dance is the tool, if that makes sense, for connection. And then it's like, all right, what do you want to do? Okay, let's go into how do you get there? And challenging them and giving them the information that, gosh, if I wish I would have known that. Like I say this, like I learned that one the hard way. Well, let me give it back. Let me pay it forward by, let me tell Mia, okay, let me make sure when you first start, don't do this. You need to make sure you do this. Like this is just those pieces of things to make them begin to think, because once again, children are such fertile ground. Like you just plant the right seeds and, you can watch that grow and how that just, can really shape their lives. And I think that's just really the start, but I also think that's the next phase of where I would like to go is, how do you empower the next generation of leaders? How do you give them tools for business, and how do you connect them? Like, I love networking and meeting people, but let me connect you to this young entrepreneur, so that you can give them your advice and your piece of what they could do, and how how that can influence their business, and you receive something from that. Like I receive so much. I say these kids keep me young. That sounds really old when I said that. These kids keep me young.
I've got sort of one more thought that I want to explore before we get out of here. With all the the protests that have been happening the last, I guess it's only really been a couple weeks. It feels like forever. Yeah, but it's the I think that the momentum that we have right now for these conversations is really important, and I'm happy, as hard as it is to have these conversations, I'm happy to see that the pressure is still on for leaders around the country and really around the world to step up and make real change, because people are not just asking for it and tweeting about it, but really like taking it upon themselves uh to be the change they want to see in the world. I'm curious um what you sort of hope to see on the other side of this. What's one thing that you um are envisioning, or hope is, or one of the major outcomes for the current sort of the current situation that they're in right now?
Yeah, well, the I want to say the challenge for me is that I am kind of a radical in my thought process, and I've when we talk about the that you're just being tired right now, is because I've always been so, I get upset, and I've been upset before this. You know what I mean? I've been upset about being, okay, I didn't raise capital. I didn't come in with the business and have someone give me 100,000, 500,000, like to do whatever I wanted to do, and it's because I'm a Black woman, or not specifically, but in that piece of like, what are the rooms, what are the doors, like Black entrepreneurship wasn't a big deal when I first started, like people weren't really into it. So I guess I'm in that same sense of like, I'm just as angry as everyone else. And I feel like I've been holding that anger and trying to navigate into a world so that I could get to a certain place as a business owner. I say this because now in my emails and any of my correspondence, if you people have been very clear, like, is this about Black lives? Like, are you making sure you give enough money to the Black person? Do you have somebody, like just challenging in ways that I have not challenged before, because you have to figure out how to maneuver and how to be, just for me, sometimes being the right Black girl so that you can be in the room, so that you're not the one always yelling and being like, well, this is, the most wokest. That's not the, it's hard to be successful per se and still be the wokest in the room with them, like, oh, here she come again, talk about this Black car, and that's always been me, it's that piece. And now with this kind of, I feel like this can of worms that has exploded and opened, is to continue to challenge if you weren't challenging before, but in your space to challenge, ask the questions, because it won't, I don't want to, we're not going to go back to a normal, but it's definitely, what will this world look like if we continuously keep our voices in the forefront? But it's also like, burn it down if it needs to be burnt down, like change it up, shift it completely, throw it out. Like, what does it take for that level of, like, I'm that person, like, if there's a wound, dig into it. There's no way you can just put a Band-Aid on it. It's what we've been doing for so long, and now it's like gotten so big, it's like a pus. So it's like, it's popped, and it's like, dig into it before anything can start, because I think we're just still digging, and we're still digging, and we're still digging. And I just think, keep challenging any opportunity you have, any space that you're in. If you have a seat at the table and you're that Black person, speak up now. And not just speak up in a way that you have to be the voice, but speak up in the way that says, well, I've been saying this, somebody else needs to bring this to the table. Like, let that happen in the room. But sometimes your presence alone is going to incite those conversations, and that's what's been happening on my end, is just me sitting in a room and then maybe saying one or two things and then stepping back, and then, okay, yep, because you see me in the room. But making sure that we stay in the rooms and we're still challenging in those rooms that we might not have been challenging in before.
How can folks that are listening support your work?
Good question. Right now, it's kind of I think the biggest thing is staying in touch with us. I would say the social media, that's the biggest piece right now. I think that's where my next push was interesting. You mentioned that, is really pushing ways to connect and engage via social, which is Empower Dance, or me personally, Nicole _Oxendine. Any support to our foundation, which is empowerdancefoundation.org, just to help get us back, going. I'll probably be launching some sort of fundraising piece as I'm talking about what's next. So I say, just stay connected, because the next pivot will be coming, as I kind of taking this time to rest and align and listen to God's voice and where I'm being led to go with the next iteration of business. So, yeah.
My grandparents will be so excited to hear that I interviewed you today. I'll be sure to share this podcast with them and let them know that that their leadership in the church has, birthed the next generation of leaders in Durham. Thanks again so much for doing this with me. I really enjoyed having this conversation and getting to know more about your story, and I'm sure everyone else will as well. So I hope you enjoy your time away and your return to Zen, and feel twice as strong when you come back, and we can kind of return to whatever the new normal is, and get back to the work that we're all doing. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you later. Tell your grandparents I said hello.
I will.